I came home after hip surgery, and my own key would not work. My son said, "Dad, we changed the locks for security." Then I saw the empty space where my wife's piano used to be. I pulled out my phone and said, "I have recordings of everything you planned." They faced consequences they never expected. Before I tell you how I destroyed their little scheme, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Gerald Mitchell, and I am 68 years old. People see a man with gray hair and a walker, and they assume my mind has aged along with my joints. That was the mistake my son Brandon and his wife Stephanie made. They forgot that before I was a retiree, I was a structural engineer. I spent 40 years calculating load-bearing limits and designing foundations that could withstand earthquakes. I know exactly how much pressure a structure can take before it collapses. My family was about to learn that I know how to bring a house down just as well as I know how to build one. The rain in Seattle was relentless that afternoon. It was a cold, gray drizzle that seeped into your bones. The Uber driver helped me out of the car and set my walker on the wet pavement. I thanked him and watched the car drive away, leaving me alone in front of the 2-story colonial house I had designed and built with my own hands 30 years ago. My hip throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. The doctor had said full recovery would take months, but I had pushed to come home early. I wanted my own bed. I wanted the smell of the pot roast Catherine used to make even though she had been gone for 5 years. Most of all, I wanted to sit at her Steinway Model M piano and play the few chords I knew. It was my way of talking to her. I made my way up the driveway slowly. The movement was agonizing. Step, drag, step, drag. When I finally reached the front porch, I was out of breath. I dug into my pocket and pulled out my brass keyring. It was the same key I had used for 3 decades. I slid it into the lock, but it stopped halfway. I frowned and wiggled it. Nothing. I tried again, pushing harder this time. The key would not turn. It hit a solid metal barrier inside the cylinder. I pulled it out and looked at the lock. It looked shiny and new. A smart lock with a keypad had replaced my solid brass deadbolt. Confusion washed over me, followed immediately by a surge of panic. Had I come to the wrong house? I looked around. No. This was my oak tree. This was my mailbox. I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed inside. A moment later, the door swung open. Brandon stood there. My son was 32 years old, but in that moment he looked like a stranger. He was wearing one of my bathrobes. He looked at me not with relief or happiness, but with annoyance. "You are early," he said. He did not step aside to let me in. He stood in the doorway, blocking the heat from escaping. I stared at him. "Brandon, I have been standing in the rain for 5 minutes. Why does my key not work?" "Oh, right," he said, scratching his head. "We changed the locks last week. Stephanie said the old ones were not secure enough. There have been break-ins in the neighborhood. We were going to mail you a new key next week." I did not have the energy to argue about why a smart lock was safer than a deadbolt. I pushed past him, my walker clanking against the doorframe. I needed to sit down. "Careful with the floor," Brandon snapped. "Stephanie just had it polished." I ignored him and made my way into the living room. I stopped dead. My breath caught in my throat. The room felt wrong. It felt empty. My eyes darted to the bay window, the spot where the light always hit the keys just right in the afternoon. The piano was gone. In its place sat a low, angular sofa in a garish shade of lime green. It looked cheap and modern and completely out of place in my home. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice sounded small even to my own ears. "Where is her piano?" Stephanie walked down the stairs. She was wearing a sharp business suit and holding a tablet. She did not look up as she spoke. "Oh, you are back. We did not expect you until Friday." "Where is the piano, Stephanie?" I gripped the handles of my walker so tight, my knuckles turned white. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold and devoid of empathy. It took up too much space, Gerald. We need this room for entertaining clients. You know the real estate market is competitive. We need the house to look staged and modern. That old thing made the place look like a museum. That old thing was your mother-in-law's soul, I said, my voice rising. I bought that for her on our 10th anniversary. You had no right. Relax, Dad, Brandon said, stepping between us. We sold it. It is done. We got a good price for it. Besides, with your hip, you won't be coming down here much anyway. I felt a wave of dizziness. Sold. They had sold it. Who did you sell it to? I need to get it back. You can't, Stephanie said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. The buyer picked it up yesterday. Look, Gerald, let us be practical. You can barely walk. You do not need a grand piano cluttering up the walkway. We used the money to fix up the basement for you. The basement. Yes, Brandon said. We moved your things downstairs. The master bedroom is too far for you to walk, and the stairs are dangerous. The basement is level. It has a bathroom. It is safer for you. I looked from my son to his wife. This was not a suggestion. This was a coup. They had used my 3 weeks in the hospital to dismantle my life. I am not living in the basement, I said. This is my house. My name is on the deed. Actually, Stephanie said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. You gave Brandon power of attorney when you went in for surgery. Remember, for medical decisions and asset management. We are just managing your assets. You are not capable of taking care of yourself anymore, Gerald. Look at you. You are shaking. I was shaking, but not from frailty. I was shaking with a rage so hot it felt like it could melt steel. But I knew numbers. I knew leverage. And right now I had zero leverage. I was physically weak. I was outnumbered. And I was in pain. Fine, I said. Take me downstairs. The basement had always been my workshop. It was where I kept my tools, my blueprints, and my old drafting table. But when Brandon led me down the narrow stairs, I saw that my workshop was gone. My tools were boxed up and shoved into a corner. In the center of the room was a single twin bed, the kind you see in a college dorm, and a small nightstand. The air smelled of damp concrete and mildew. There was one small window high up on the wall that let in a sliver of gray light. This is temporary, right? I asked, sinking onto the hard mattress. We will see, Brandon said. He held out his hand. By the way, the doctor said you need to avoid stress. No screen time. No news. I will hold on to your phone and wallet for safekeeping. We do not want you losing them. That is my property, Brandon. Dad, do not make this difficult. Stephanie says it is for the best. He snatched the smartphone from my pocket before I could react. He took my wallet from the nightstand where I had just set it. Rest up, Dad. Dinner is at 6. We will bring it down to you. He walked back up the stairs. I heard the heavy door click shut. Then I heard the distinct sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. They had locked me in. I sat in the silence of the basement. The humiliation washed over me. I was a prisoner in the house I had built. My hip throbbed. I lay back on the bed and stared at the exposed wooden beams of the ceiling. I knew every joist, every nail, every conduit in this ceiling. I had placed them there. They thought they had stripped me of everything. My mobility, my communication, my dignity. But they forgot one thing. I was an engineer. I understood systems, and every system has a back door. I waited until I was sure they were upstairs. I could hear their footsteps on the hardwood floor above. The sound was muffled, but distinct. Stephanie's sharp heels clicking. Brandon's heavy tread. I rolled off the bed and grabbed my walker. I made my way to the corner of the room where they had shoved my boxes of junk. I dug through a box marked Old Electronics. I pushed aside tangled cables and old remotes until my hand closed around cool plastic. It was a burner phone, a cheap prepaid flip phone I kept for emergencies when I went fishing in remote areas. I had not used it in 2 years. I prayed the battery had held a charge. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. 12% battery. It was enough. But I did not call the police. Not yet. The police would call this a civil dispute. They would see a son caring for his invalid father. I needed ammunition. I needed proof. I looked up at the ceiling again, specifically at a small plastic panel near the heating duct. To the untrained eye, it looked like a sensor for the alarm system. But I knew what it really was. 6 months ago, after a series of break-ins on our street, I had installed a high-end security system. I put cameras in the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway. I wired them myself, running the Cat6 cables through the ventilation shafts so they would be invisible. The footage did not go to the cloud where Stephanie could find it. It went to a local server, a hard drive hidden in a false bottom of my tool cabinet. Right here in the basement. I dragged my walker over to the tool cabinet. My heart was pounding against my ribs. If they had thrown this cabinet away, I was finished. But it was there, heavy and covered in dust. I opened the bottom drawer. I reached underneath and felt the small metal casing of the server. The green light was blinking steady and true. I needed a monitor. I looked around. There was an old laptop in the pile of electronics. It was slow and the screen was cracked, but it would work. I connected the laptop to the server using a spare Ethernet cable. I typed in the password. The screen filled with static for a second, then cleared. 4 distinct feeds popped up. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, and the front porch. I maximized the living room feed. The audio quality was crystal clear. Brandon was pacing back and forth in front of the lime green sofa. He was holding a glass of whiskey. Stephanie was sitting on the sofa typing furiously on her phone. "We cannot keep him down there forever," Brandon was saying. "He is going to make noise. He is going to tell the neighbors." "Let him talk," Stephanie replied without looking up. "Who will they believe? A successful real estate agent and her devoted husband, or a senile old man on high-dose painkillers? We already have Dr. Evans on board. He will testify that Gerald's cognitive decline is rapid." I clenched my teeth. Dr. Evans was Brandon's drinking buddy, a man who had lost his medical license twice and got it back through shady lawyers. But the money, Brandon said. His voice was trembling. "The 40,000 from the piano is already gone, Stephanie. The crypto market crashed again this morning. I lost another 10,000. We are still in the hole for $150,000. If we do not pay the loan sharks by the end of the month, they are going to break my legs." I froze. $150,000. My retirement fund was healthy, but it was locked in investments they could not easily touch without my signature. That is why they needed the power of attorney. That is why they sold the piano. They were desperate. "Sell the house," Stephanie said calmly. She put her phone down and looked at him. "We can't sell the house. It is in his name. Not if we declare him incompetent, Brandon. Once we get the court order, we transfer the deed. We sell the house for $1.2 million. We pay off your stupid debts. We put the old man in a state-funded nursing home. And we take the remaining $1 million and move to Canada. We start fresh." Brandon stopped pacing. He looked at the ceiling right at the spot where I was sitting underneath. "He loved that piano," he whispered. "He will forget about it in a week," Stephanie said. "Just like he will forget about this house. He is a burden, Brandon. We are doing him a favor. He needs professional care. We need a future." I watched my son. I watched the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had put through college. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say no. Instead, he downed the rest of his whiskey in one gulp. "Okay," he said. "Okay, let us do it. When does Dr. Evans come over to sign the papers?" "Tomorrow afternoon," Stephanie said. "Make sure the old man is drugged up. Give him extra painkillers with his dinner. We need him drooling and confused when Evans gets here." I sat back in the darkness of the basement. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated my face. I was not sad anymore. The sadness had evaporated, leaving only cold, hard clarity. They wanted a senile old man. Fine. I would give them a performance worthy of an Oscar. They wanted to play games with my life. They did not realize they were playing chess with a grandmaster. I reached for the burner phone again. I did not call the police. I dialed a number I had not called in 10 years. A number that belonged to a man named O'Malley, the most ruthless estate lawyer in Seattle. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, Patrick, it is Gerald Mitchell." "Gerald. I thought you were retired." "I was," I said, my eyes fixed on the screen where my son and daughter-in-law were toasting to their future. "But I think I have one more demolition job to do. I need you to meet me, and bring a notary." I hung up the phone. Upstairs, I heard Stephanie laugh. It was a sharp, victorious sound. Enjoy it, I thought. Enjoy the champagne. Because tomorrow you are going to choke on it. I powered down the laptop and hid it back under the pile of junk. I laid down on the twin bed and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. My hip hurt. My heart hurt. But my mind was sharp. When the door opened an hour later and Brandon came down with a tray of food, I was ready. "Here is dinner, Dad," he said, his voice fake and sweet. "And here are your pills. Take them all. You need your sleep." I looked at the 3 white pills in his hand. Oxycodone, a dose high enough to knock out a horse. "Thank you, son," I mumbled, letting my hand tremble as I took the water glass. "You are such a good boy." I put the pills in my mouth. I took a sip of water. I swallowed. Brandon smiled. He watched me until he was sure I had taken them. Then he turned off the light and left, locking the door behind him. He did not see me spit the pills out into my hand the moment the door closed. I flushed them down the toilet in the corner. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle. I heard the wind and rain outside. I was alone. I was locked in a basement. I had no key. But I had the truth. And come morning, I was going to use it to burn their whole world to the ground. The smell of roasting chicken wafted down the stairs and into the damp basement air. It was a scent that should have been comforting. It was the smell of Sunday dinners from 20 years ago, when the house was full of laughter, and Catherine was alive to carve the bird. But tonight, the aroma turned my stomach. It smelled like bait. At 6 o'clock sharp, I heard the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding back. The door opened, and Brandon appeared at the top of the stairs. He was dressed in a clean button-down shirt and slacks, which was unusual for a Tuesday night at home. "Dinner is ready, Dad," he called out. "Let me help you up." The climb upstairs was a humiliating ordeal. Every step sent a jolt of electricity through my healing hip. Brandon gripped my arm, but his touch was impatient. He was not supporting me, he was hauling me. I focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I had to look weak. I had to look like a man whose body was failing him, so that they would believe my mind was failing too. When we finally reached the dining room, I stopped to catch my breath. The table was set with the good china. The Wedgwood plates with the gold rim that Catherine only brought out for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Crystal wine glasses sparkled under the chandelier. In the center of the table sat the roast chicken surrounded by roasted vegetables. It was a scene of domestic perfection. It was a stage set. "Sit here, Gerald," Stephanie said. She pulled out the chair at the head of the table. I lowered myself slowly into the chair, letting out a groan of pain that was only half fake. Stephanie took her seat to my right, and Brandon sat to my left. They had positioned themselves to flank me, to box me in. Stephanie poured wine for herself and Brandon. For me, she poured a glass of ice water. "No wine for you tonight, Gerald," she said with a tight smile. "It interferes with your medication. We want you clear-headed." I nodded meekly. "You are right, Stephanie. Thank you for taking such good care of me." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I saw her shoulders relax slightly. She bought it. She thought I was the grateful invalid. We began to eat. The food was delicious, but I could barely swallow. I was too busy analyzing every glance that passed between them. Brandon was nervous. He kept tapping his fork against the side of his plate. He drank his wine too quickly, refilling the glass, before he had even finished his chicken. Stephanie, on the other hand, was cool as ice. She cut her meat with surgical precision. So Dad Brandon said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. "How is the basement? Is the bed comfortable enough?" "It is fine, son," I said, keeping my eyes on my plate. "A little cold, but I found an extra blanket." "We will get a space heater down there tomorrow," Stephanie interrupted. "We are just so worried about you falling again, Gerald. The stairs to the second floor are a death trap for someone in your condition. Down there you are safe." "Safe?" The word hung in the air. "We have been thinking a lot about your future, Dad." Brandon continued. He sounded like he was reciting a script. "We want to make sure you have the best care possible. But medical bills are expensive, and maintaining this big house is a lot of work." I put my fork down. "Here it comes. I have my pension, Brandon, and the savings. I can manage." Stephanie sighed, the kind of sigh a mother gives a stubborn toddler. "Gerald, be realistic. Your pension barely covers the property taxes and utilities. And your savings. Well, let us just say the market has been volatile. We want to protect what you have left." She reached down beside her chair and picked up a thick manila folder. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I knew what was in that folder. I had heard them planning it on the camera feed. She placed the folder on the table, pushing aside the roasted potatoes to make room. She opened it to reveal a stack of documents clipped together. The paper was heavy and cream-colored. Legal stock. "What is this?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Just some paperwork for the insurance company." Stephanie lied smoothly. She pulled a gold pen from her pocket. "Since you are recovering and on heavy narcotics, the insurance company requires a designated representative to handle the billing disputes. It just allows Brandon to sign off on the hospital invoices, so you do not have to worry about the paperwork." She flipped to the last page where a yellow sticky note with a "sign here" arrow was attached. "Just sign right there," Dad Brandon said. "Then we can have dessert." Stephanie made apple pie. I reached for the glasses hanging around my neck. They were my old reading glasses, the ones with the scratched lens. I put them on slowly, my hands trembling. "I should read it first," I said. "I always read before I sign." Stephanie laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh, Gerald, do not be silly. It is standard legalese. Boring stuff. Section 402, subsection C, blah, blah, blah. It just says Brandon can talk to the billing department. Your dinner is getting cold." I looked down at the paper. I ignored the signature line. My eyes scanned the paragraph above it. I did not need to read the whole thing. I saw the keywords. Durable power of attorney, revocation of trust, full authority over real estate and liquid assets. This was not an insurance form. This was a death warrant for my independence. If I signed this, they could sell the house, drain my accounts, and dump me in a state facility by the end of the week. And legally, I would have given them permission to do it. My blood boiled. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to grab that roast chicken and throw it at Stephanie's smug face. I wanted to shout that I knew about the crypto losses and the debt sharks. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I refused to sign now without a reason, they would know I was onto them. They might forge my signature, or worse, they might physically force me. I needed to buy time. I needed to destroy the document without looking like I was trying to. I looked at the water glass in front of me. It was a heavy crystal tumbler filled to the brim with ice and water. Condensation was dripping down the sides. I looked at the soup bowl next to it. Tomato bisque, thick red and hot. I looked up at Brandon. He was staring at the pen in my hand, sweating. "I do not understand this part here," I said, pointing a shaking finger at the middle of the page. Stephanie leaned in, impatient. "Which part, Gerald?" I moved my hand. My elbow jerked. A spasm. A violent, uncontrollable twitch that I had perfected after watching Parkinson's patients in the hospital waiting room. My arm lashed out and hit the water glass. It tipped. But I did not just let it tip. I flailed, trying to catch it, and in the process I swept the bowl of tomato bisque right off the placemat. It was a catastrophe. The water flooded across the table, soaking into the heavy paper instantly. The tomato bisque followed a red tidal wave of hot soup that sludged over the documents, covering the signature line and the text in a thick orange goo. "Oh no," I cried out, dropping the pen. "Oh my God, I am so sorry, my hand. It jerked." Stephanie screamed. She jumped back her chair, scraping loudly against the floor, but she was not fast enough. The soup dripped off the table and splattered onto her pristine cream-colored trousers. "You stupid old man," she shrieked. "Look what you did." I am sorry, I stammered, grabbing a napkin and uselessly dabbing at the sodden mess of pulp that used to be the power of attorney. I tried to catch it. "I am so clumsy." Brandon stood up, his face pale. "The papers, are they ruined?" He reached for the folder, but the wet paper tore in his hands. The ink was running. The document was destroyed. Stephanie was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked at me with pure venom. For a second, I thought she was going to hit me. I saw her hand twitch. It was an accident. I whimpered, shrinking back in my chair. Stephanie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She was regaining control. She was remembering the long game. "It is okay, Gerald," she said through gritted teeth. Her voice was trembling with suppressed rage. "It is just an accident. We can print another copy." "Not tonight," Brandon said, looking at the mess. "The printer is out of toner. I have to go to the office supply store tomorrow." "Tomorrow then," Stephanie snapped. She glared at me. "You have made a mess of dinner, Gerald. I think you should go back downstairs. You are clearly too tired to function." I nodded, keeping my head down. I lost my appetite anyway. "Brandon, help your father back to the basement," Stephanie ordered. "And mop this up." Brandon came around the table. He grabbed my arm roughly. "Come on, Dad." He marched me back to the basement door. He did not help me navigate the stairs this time. He just watched from the top landing as I painfully descended step by step. "Be more careful next time," he said coldly. He slammed the door. I heard the lock click. I stood in the darkness at the bottom of the stairs. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might give out. I leaned against the cold concrete wall and let out a long, shaky breath. I had won. I had bought myself 24 hours. But I knew this was only a skirmish. Stephanie was smart. She would realize that my accident was a little too convenient. She would not let me near a glass of water next time. Next time she might not even bother with the dinner. Next time she might just hold the pen in my hand and force it across the paper. I made my way to the twin bed and sat down. My hip was screaming in agony from the stairs. I needed to rest. But I could not sleep. I had to prepare for the appraiser. I knew from the camera feed that Stephanie had scheduled a friend to come over tomorrow at 10 a.m. She told me it was just a social visit, but I knew he was a real estate appraiser. They wanted a fast valuation so they could list the house the second they got my signature. I looked at the unfinished ceiling above me. I looked at the exposed pipes and the electrical conduits. If they wanted to sell this house, they needed it to pass inspection. They needed it to look valuable. I smiled in the dark. It was a grim, determined smile. By the time that appraiser walked through the front door tomorrow, I was going to make sure this house looked like a money pit that no sane person would touch with a 10-foot pole. I pulled out my burner phone and checked the battery. 10%. I had one text message from O'Malley. Meeting set. Notary secured. Hold the line, Gerald. I put the phone away. I laid down on the hard mattress and stared into the blackness. You want to play dirty, Stephanie? I whispered to the empty room. Let us play. The basement at 2 a.m. was a tomb of silence. The only sound was the rhythmic dripping of a pipe somewhere in the walls and the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. I lay on the twin bed, my eyes wide open, staring into the suffocating darkness. My hip throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but I did not reach for the pain medication. I needed my mind sharp. I needed to be ready. I knew they would come. It was the next logical step in their plan. They had failed to get my signature on the power of attorney form at dinner thanks to my well-timed clumsiness. Now they needed leverage. They needed a reason to prove I was unfit to manage my own affairs. And what better reason than drug dependency? At 2:15, I heard it. The soft click of the deadbolt at the top of the stairs sliding back. It was quiet, so quiet that if I had been asleep, I never would have heard it. But I was not asleep. I was a sentry in my own home. I shifted my position slightly, turning my back to the room and pulling the thin wool blanket up to my ear. I slowed my breathing, forcing it into the deep, rhythmic pattern of deep sleep. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 2. Exhale for 4. It was a technique I had used during MREs to keep from panicking. Now it was my camouflage. The door creaked open. A sliver of yellow light from the hallway sliced through the darkness of the basement, then vanished as the door was eased shut. Footsteps descended the wooden stairs. They were hesitant. Careful. The steps of a thief who knew he was trespassing on sacred ground. I gripped the burner phone beneath my pillow. I had set it to record audio an hour ago. The microphone was positioned just at the edge of the pillowcase. The footsteps reached the concrete floor. A beam of light swept across the room. I could feel it playing over the boxes of my tools, the cold pipes on the ceiling, and finally resting on me. I did not flinch. I kept my breathing steady even as my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Dad. The whisper was barely audible. It was Brandon. My son. The boy I had taught to fish. The man who was now creeping into my room like a criminal. I did not answer. I let out a soft snore, a little rattle in the back of my throat to sell the performance. He moved closer. I could smell him, the stale scent of wine from dinner and the sharp tang of nervous sweat. He stood over the bed for a long moment. I could feel his presence looming over me, a dark weight in the air. Was he checking if I was alive? Was he feeling a pang of guilt? Then he moved. He turned away from the bed and went to the small nightstand. I heard the drawer slide open. He was looking for something specific. He pushed aside my reading glasses and the notepad. Then I heard the rattle of plastic. The pill bottle. It was the prescription for oxycodone the surgeon had given me. A powerful opioid meant for severe post-surgical pain. There were 40 pills in that bottle. Enough to kill a man, if taken carelessly. I heard the cap being unscrewed. The child safety lock clicked. Then the sound of pills being poured into a hand. I am sorry, Dad, Brandon whispered again. His voice cracked. I really am, but we need this. He was not taking them for himself. He was not an addict. This was something far more sinister. He was staging a crime scene. He poured some of the pills back into the bottle. He was calculating the dosage. If he took too many, it would look like I had overdosed. If he took just enough, it would look like abuse, like I was popping them like candy. He screwed the cap back on and placed the bottle on top of the nightstand, not inside the drawer. He wanted it visible. He wanted it to be the first thing anyone saw. He walked back to the stairs, his footsteps lighter, now faster. He had what he came for. The door opened and closed. The lock slid back into place. I waited 5 full minutes before I moved. I sat up in the darkness and reached for the nightstand. I grabbed the bottle and shook it. It felt light. Too light. I turned on the small lamp. I poured the pills onto the blanket and counted them. 6. There were only 6 pills left. Yesterday there had been 30. He had taken 24 pills. If a doctor or a social worker looked at this bottle, they would see that I had consumed 24 high-strength opioids in less than 48 hours. That was enough to classify me as a danger to myself. It was enough to get me committed for emergency psychiatric evaluation. I smiled in the dim light. It was a cold, humorless smile. Brandon thought he was smart. He thought he had just framed me. But he had made a critical error. He did not know that I had switched the pills. 2 days ago, the moment I arrived home and sensed the hostility, I had replaced the oxycodone with high-strength Tylenol and laxatives I had in my travel kit. They looked identical white round pills. I had flushed the real opioids down the toilet to remove the temptation and the risk. So Brandon had just stolen 24 laxatives. But I could not let them know that. Not yet. I had to play the victim. I had to let the trap snap shut around my ankle so I could drag them into the pit with me. I put the 6 remaining placebo pills back in the bottle and placed it exactly where Brandon had left it. I turned off the lamp and lay back down. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices upstairs. It was not just Brandon and Stephanie. There was a third voice, a woman's voice, professional and stern. I dragged myself out of bed and moved to my hidden listening station in the corner. I booted up the laptop and put on the headphones. The kitchen camera feed came to life. Stephanie was standing by the kitchen island, holding a cup of coffee. She was wearing a look of practiced concern. Opposite her sat a woman in a gray suit holding a clipboard. "I am just so worried about him," Stephanie was saying. Her voice trembled perfectly. "He has been confused since he came home. He forgets where he is. He becomes aggressive. And the medication. I think he is taking too much." The woman nodded, writing on her clipboard. "Has he threatened you?" "He threw a bowl of hot soup at me last night," Stephanie said. She pointed to a faint stain on the floor she had deliberately missed while cleaning. "He said he wanted to burn the house down. And then this morning, I found his pill bottle. He has gone through a month's supply in 2 days." Brandon walked into the frame. He looked pale and tired. He placed the pill bottle on the table. The bottle he had stolen from me. "Here it is," he said. "There are only a few left. We are terrified he is going to overdose. We cannot watch him 24 hours a day. We have jobs. We need help." The woman picked up the bottle and examined the label. She shook it. Her face hardened. "This is a very serious amount of narcotics," she said. "If he has consumed this much, he is in immediate danger. I need to see him." "He is in the basement," Stephanie said. "We had to lock the door for his own safety. He tries to wander out into the street at night." I took off the headphones. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from adrenaline. This was it. This was the nukes. They had called Adult Protective Services. They were trying to get me declared incompetent and removed from the home immediately. I had about 3 minutes before they came downstairs. I grabbed my walker. I messed up my hair to look disheveled. I unbuttoned the top button of my pajama shirt. I needed to look the part. But before I moved away from my desk, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the SD card from the night before. The audio recording of Brandon entering my room. The sound of him stealing the pills. The whisper of his apology. I slipped the card into the hidden pocket sewn into the waistband of my pajama pants. I heard the key turn in the lock upstairs. Gerald, Stephanie called out. Her voice was loud and commanding. "There is someone here to see you." I did not answer. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my head hang low. I let my mouth hang open slightly. When the woman from APS walked down the stairs, followed closely by Stephanie and Brandon, she saw exactly what they wanted her to see. A broken, confused old man sitting in a dark basement. "Mr. Mitchell," the woman said gently, stepping over a box of my tools. "My name is Sarah. I am from social services. I am here to help you." I looked up at her. I made my eyes wide and vacant. "Who?" I croaked. "Your son is worried about you, Mr. Mitchell. He says you have been taking a lot of medicine." I looked at Brandon. He refused to meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, his hand in his pocket. The pocket where 24 laxatives were currently residing. "I do not know," I whispered. "I am just so tired." "See," Stephanie said triumphantly. "He does not even know what day it is. He is completely gone." Sarah looked at me with pity. Then she looked around the basement. She saw the single bed, the lack of windows, the dampness. "Why is he living in the basement?" she asked, her tone sharpening as she turned to Stephanie. "It is temporary," Stephanie said quickly. "Until we can find a suitable facility. We cannot keep him upstairs. He falls." Sarah did not look convinced, but she had a job to do. "Mr. Mitchell, I am going to recommend an emergency evaluation. We need to get you to a hospital to check your toxicity levels. If you have taken that many pills, you need medical attention right now." I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. "Hospital is good." I wanted to go to the hospital. A blood test would prove I had 0 opioids in my system. It would prove that the pills were missing, but not inside me. It would raise the question, where did they go? And that question would lead straight back to the man standing in the corner, sweating in his bathrobe. I stood up, leaning heavily on my walker. As I passed Brandon, I stumbled slightly. He reached out to steady me. "Careful, Dad," he muttered. I leaned in close to his ear. "Just for a second." "You look pale, son," I whispered. "You should take something for that stomach of yours." He frowned, confused. I limped up the stairs, my heart singing a war song. They were taking me out of the house. They thought they were winning. They thought they were disposing of the evidence. They were wrong. They were just delivering the witness to the stand. The hospital bathroom was the first place I had felt safe in 3 days. The air smelled of antiseptic and industrial soap, but to me it smelled like freedom. Outside the heavy door, my son Brandon was pacing the hallway, playing the role of the distraught child, waiting for the toxicity report that he was certain would condemn me. He was so confident that he had let me go to the restroom unaccompanied. I leaned against the cold, tiled wall and pulled the burner phone from the hidden pocket in my pajama waistband. My hands were steady now. The adrenaline of the game had burned away the pain in my hip. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah." "Leonard," I said, keeping my voice to a harsh whisper. "It is Gerald. I do not have much time." "Gerald, I heard you were crippled, or senile, depending on who you ask at the chess club. I am neither, Leonard, but I am currently locked in my basement, and my son is trying to sell my house out from under me." There was a pause on the other end. Leonard did not gasp. He did not ask if I was joking. Leonard was a retired forensic accountant who had spent 30 years chasing money launderers for the IRS. Nothing surprised him. "What do you need?" he asked. "He sold Catherine's piano," I said. The Steinway. He sold it 2 days ago for $40,000 cash. I need to know who bought it. You want me to track a cash transaction in 48 hours. I want you to do what you do best, Leonard. Brandon is an idiot. He would have bragged about the sale, or he would have used a broker to move it fast. Check the local listings. Check the upscale pawn networks. Find out where that piano went. It is the key to everything. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. Steinway Model M, 40 grand. Got it. Anything else? Get in touch with O'Malley, I said. Tell him I am accelerating the timeline. And Leonard. Do not call this number unless you have a name. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my waistband. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at the mirror. The man looking back was old. His skin was gray. His eyes were tired. But behind those eyes, the gears were turning. When I walked back out into the waiting room, the doctor was already talking to Brandon and the woman from social services. Brandon looked agitated. He was waving his hands. But the bottle was empty, he was saying. I saw him take the pills. Mr. Mitchell, the doctor said, his voice calm but firm. We ran a full toxicology screen. Your father's blood is clean. There are no opioids in his system. In fact, his levels of acetaminophen suggest he has only taken Tylenol. The woman from social services turned to Brandon. Her expression had shifted from sympathy to suspicion. If he did not take the pills, Mr. Mitchell, then where are they? I do not know, Brandon stammered. He must have flushed them, or hidden them. He is manipulative. You do not know him. I shuffled forward, leaning heavily on my walker. I made sure to look small and confused. Did I pass the test? I asked innocently. Can I go home now? I missed lunch. The social worker looked at me, then at Brandon. There is no medical reason to hold him, she said. And without evidence of self-harm or chemical dependency, I cannot authorize an involuntary hold. He goes home. Brandon looked like he had been punched in the gut. He had played his ace card and I had trumped it with a blood test. He had to drive me home in silence. The rain hammered against the roof of the car, matching the storm brewing inside the vehicle. He knew I was up to something, but he could not prove it. He was trapped in a lie of his own making. Back in the basement, they locked the door with extra force this time. I heard Brandon and Stephanie arguing upstairs. Their voices were muffled thuds through the floorboards. They were panicking. Their plan to get me committed had failed. Now they would have to rely on the appraiser and the quick sale. I sat on the bed and waited. Time in the basement moved differently. It was a fluid, dark thing. I counted the drips from the pipe. 1, 2, 3. At 6 in the evening, the burner phone buzzed against my hip. It was a text message from Leonard. It contained only 2 words. Richard Harrington. I stared at the screen. The name hit me harder than the physical pain in my hip. Richard Harrington. Of course. It had to be him. Harrington was a developer who had made his fortune tearing down the history of this town and replacing it with glass and steel monstrosities. He was a man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. 5 years ago, he had knocked on my door and offered to buy my house for cash. He wanted to bulldoze it and combine my lot with the one next door to build a 6-unit condo complex. I had told him to get off my property. I told him that this house was built with my own hands, that my wife's spirit was in these walls. He had laughed at me. He called me a sentimental dinosaur. Now he had her piano. I closed my eyes and I could see it. I could see that beautiful instrument sitting in his sterile modern living room unplayed. He had not bought it because he loved music. He had bought it because it was a trophy. He had bought it because he knew it was mine. Brandon must have reached out to him, knowing Harrington was the only one with enough cash to buy it immediately, without questions. My grip tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked. This was no longer just about survival. This was no longer just about teaching my son a lesson. This was war. Harrington did not just buy a piano. He bought a ticket to his own destruction. I typed a reply to Leonard. Address. The response came 10 seconds later. It was an address in the new gated community on the hill. The fortress of the nouveau riche. I deleted the messages. I lay back on the pillow. My mind began to construct a new schematic. I needed to get into Harrington's house. I needed to confirm the piano was there, and then I needed to use it to bury them all. Upstairs, the arguing had stopped. I heard the heavy tread of Brandon's footsteps approaching the basement door. He was coming down. I hid the phone. I composed my face. The door opened. Brandon stood there holding a plate of cold pasta. He did not come in. He set the plate on the floor at the top of the stairs. Eat, he said. We have a big day tomorrow. The appraiser is coming back to finish the inspection. Do not embarrass us, Dad. I looked up at him from the shadows. I would not dream of it, son, I said. He slammed the door. I waited until his footsteps faded. Then I stood up and walked to the corner where my toolbox sat. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was a set of lockpicks. I had learned to use them 30 years ago when I worked on secure sites. I looked at the door at the top of the stairs. It was a standard deadbolt. Grade 2 residential security. I could open it in 40 seconds. But not tonight. Tonight, I needed to rest. Because tomorrow, I had a performance to give. Tomorrow, I was going to meet the appraiser. And I was going to make sure that when Harrington tried to buy this house, he would be buying a nightmare. I ate the cold pasta. It tasted like victory. The pieces were moving on the board. The king was cornered, but he still had his knights, and the knights were coming for the pawns. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained a bruised purple color. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I was sitting on the lime green sofa in the living room, where Stephanie had positioned me. She had dressed me in a clean cardigan and combed my hair. I looked like the perfect prop, the kindly grandfather in the corner. Stephanie opened the door with her brightest realtor smile, the kind that showed too many teeth and did not reach her eyes. "Justin, come in," she chirped. "So glad you could make it." A man stepped into the foyer. He was about 40, wearing a suit that was slightly too tight and carrying a digital laser measure and a tablet. He looked around the room with the predatory gaze of someone calculating square footage and dollar signs. "This must be your father-in-law," Stephanie said, gesturing to me. "Gerald, this is Justin. He is just an old friend from college dropping by to say hello." I looked at Justin. I looked at the laser measure in his hand. I looked at the clipboard tucked under his arm. "Hello, Justin," I said, my voice trembling just the right amount. "Did you go to clown college with Stephanie?" Stephanie's smile froze. Justin blinked, confused. "Dad is a joker," Stephanie said, letting out a high-pitched laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Justin is actually in the housing industry. He just loves architecture. He wanted to see the house." "I see," I said. "Well, it is a lovely house. Or it used to be, before the settling started." Justin stopped halfway into the room. Settling. Stephanie shot me a warning look. "Dad, ignore him. He gets confused about the timeline. The house is solid as a rock." I leaned forward, gripping my walker. I beckoned Justin closer. He stepped toward me instinctively. "Do you feel that?" I whispered loudly. "Feel what?" Justin asked, looking down at the floor. "The vibration," I said. "We are on a liquefaction zone here. You know what that means, right? The soil turns to soup when the big one hits. I designed the foundation 30 years ago, but concrete degrades, you know. Spalling. Carbonation." Justin looked at Stephanie. "Is there a structural issue?" "No," Stephanie snapped. "Absolutely not. The foundation was inspected 5 years ago. 5 years is a long time in geology, I muttered, returning to my neutral staring at the wall pose, especially with the water table rising. Did you know the sump pump failed 3 times last winter? The crawl space was a swimming pool. Mold loves damp, dark places. I saw Justin take a subtle half-step back. He tapped something on his tablet. Why do we not start the tour? Stephanie said, her voice tight. The kitchen is this way. Gourmet finishes. Granite countertops. She led him into the kitchen. I waited a count of 5, then hoisted myself up and followed them. My hip hurt, but the joy of sabotage was a powerful anesthetic. I found them standing by the island. Stephanie was pointing out the stainless steel appliances. And we just redid the plumbing last year, she was lying. PEX piping throughout. I shuffled into the room. Is that what the contractor told you? I asked innocently. Stephanie turned around slowly. Her eyes were pleading with me to shut up, but I just smiled a vacuous, senile smile. I thought I saw him using galvanized steel, I said. You know how that corrodes from the inside out, leads to restricted flow, and lead leaching. Remember how the water tasted metallic last week, son? I looked at Brandon, who was leaning against the fridge, looking miserable. He jumped. I do not recall, Dad. I tapped my cane on the floor tiles. Listen to that. Hollow. The subfloor must be delaminating. When the joists warp, they pull away from the plywood. It is a ticking time bomb, really. One heavy party and boom, down into the basement. Justin was not looking at the granite countertops anymore. He was looking at the floor as if it were a minefield. Mr. Mitchell, Justin said, addressing me directly. Are you saying there are active structural concerns? Stephanie stepped between us. He does not know what he is saying, Justin. He used to be an engineer 40 years ago. He mixes up his old projects with this house. This house is pristine. I let out a long, wheezing cough. Pristine, I repeated. That is what they said about the Titanic. I saw Justin make a note on his tablet. It was a long note. Stephanie grabbed Justin's arm. Let us go upstairs. The master suite is incredible. Vaulted ceilings. I did not follow them upstairs. I did not need to. The seed was planted. But I had one more card to play. One that would guarantee this appraisal came in low enough to ruin their financing plans. I went to the hallway thermostat. It was a smart model connected to the home network, but the wiring behind it was old school. I pulled the faceplate off just a fraction of an inch. I found the 2 control wires. I waited until I heard their footsteps directly overhead in the master bedroom. Then I shorted the wires against the metal casing for just a second. Spark. The lights in the hallway flickered. A loud buzzing sound echoed through the walls. It sounded like an angry hornet's nest inside the drywall. I heard a yelp from upstairs. What was that? Justin's voice drifted down. Nothing, Stephanie cried out. Probably just a bulb blowing out. I did it again. Longer this time. The buzzing intensified. The smell of ozone faintly filled the air. That is arcing, Justin said. That is aluminum wiring. That is a fire hazard. I shuffled back to the sofa and sat down just as they came rushing down the stairs. Justin looked pale. Stephanie looked murderous. I think I have seen enough, Justin said, packing his laser measure away. But you have not seen the backyard, Stephanie pleaded. The landscaping. I need to check the county records on that electrical permit, Justin said, moving toward the door. And the foundation report. If what your father says about the water table is true, this changes the comps significantly. He looked at me on the sofa. Nice meeting you, sir. Thank you for the information. I waved. Check the lintels on the way out, young man. I think the termites got to them in '98. Justin practically ran out the door. The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Stephanie turned to me slowly. Her face was red, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "What did you do?" she whispered. I looked up at her, my eyes wide and innocent. "I just wanted to help Stephanie. I did not want your friend to buy a lemon. You know how expensive dry rot repairs can be." "You senile old bat!" she screamed. She picked up a decorative vase from the side table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the fireplace. That was a mistake. The sound of the shattering vase was loud enough to be picked up by the audio sensors I had calibrated on the security system. "You just cost us thousands of dollars," Stephanie yelled, advancing on me. "That appraisal is going to come in under $1 million. We cannot refinance with that number. We cannot sell with that number." She was looming over me now. "Maybe you should have fixed the wiring," I said softly. Brandon grabbed her arm. "Steph, stop. He does not know. He knows," she hissed. "Look at him. He is smiling." I wiped the smile off my face, instantly replacing it with a look of fear. "I want to go to my room," I whined. "I do not like the yelling. Get him out of my sight," Stephanie screamed at Brandon. "Put him back in the hole." Brandon dragged me downstairs. He was rougher this time. His fingers dug into my bicep. "Why do you have to make this so hard, Dad?" he asked as he shoved me into the basement. "We are trying to help you." "You are trying to help yourselves," I said, straightening my cardigan. "And you are doing a terrible job of it." He slammed the door and locked it. I waited until his footsteps retreated. Then I walked over to the corner and did a little dance. A slow, painful victory shuffle. I pulled out the burner phone. I had a text from O'Malley. Appraiser just pulled the permit history. "He is flagging the property as high risk." "Good work, Gerald." I sat down on the bed. They thought they were selling a mansion. I had just turned it into a money pit. The appraisal would come in low. The bank would deny the loan. The buyers would flee. They were trapped. Trapped in a house they could not sell, with a father they could not control, and a debt that was growing by the day. And I was just getting started. The next step was the open house. If they thought the appraisal was a disaster, wait until they saw what I had planned for the public viewing. But first, I needed to deal with the doctor. Dr. Evans, the man coming tomorrow to sign my mental competency away. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. "Time to study up on psychology," I whispered. I laid back on the bed and closed my eyes, visualizing the structural integrity of my family. I had identified the stress points. I had inserted the wedges. Now all I had to do was hammer them home. The afternoon sun was weak, fighting a losing battle against the gray cloud cover that blanketed Seattle. I told Brandon I needed to walk to the end of the block and back. It was part of my physical therapy regimen prescribed by the surgeon. He had hesitated at first, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. But the fear of the social worker returning must have been fresh in his mind. He could not be seen preventing an old man from getting his exercise. "Just do not go far," he had warned me, "and take your phone." I shuffled down the driveway, leaning heavily on my walker. Every step sent a spike of fire through my hip, but I welcomed the pain. It kept me focused. I made it to the corner and turned left, away from the prying eyes of the house. 2 blocks down there was a small community park. It was empty save for a few pigeons pecking at the wet asphalt. Sitting on a bench near the duck pond was a man who looked entirely out of place. He was wearing a charcoal gray Italian suit and polished Oxfords that cost more than my first car. He was reading a newspaper, but his eyes were scanning the perimeter. Patrick O'Malley. I sat down next to him, letting out a long breath of relief. I did not look at him. I looked at the pond. "You look like hell," Gerald Patrick said without lowering his paper. "I feel like hell," I replied, "but my mind is clearer than it has been in years." Patrick folded the newspaper and placed it on his lap. He was 70 years old, just 2 years older than me, but he still had the shark-like intensity that had made him the most feared estate litigator in the state. We had played chess together every Thursday for 15 years. He knew my strategies better than anyone. I got your message about the appraiser, Patrick said, a small smile playing on his lips. Brilliant work with the electrical panel. The bank is going to demand a full structural engineer report before they lend a dime on that house. You bought yourself a week. I do not just need time, Patrick. I need a kill shot. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the SD card. It was warm from my body heat. Here it is, I said, sliding it across the bench. Everything. Audio of them plotting to sell the house to pay off gambling debts. Video of Brandon stealing my pain medication to frame me for abuse. And the footage of Stephanie admitting they sold Catherine's piano. Patrick covered the card with his hand and slipped it into his pocket in one fluid motion. This is good, Gerald. This is criminal. We can go to the police right now. We can have them arrested for elder abuse, grand larceny, and conspiracy. No, I said sharply, not yet. Patrick turned to look at me, his eyebrows raised. Why not? They are dismantling your life. Because if we arrest them now, they just look like desperate kids who made a mistake. They will get a plea deal, probation. They will cry to the judge about financial pressure. I do not want them to have a way out, Patrick. I want to crush them. I took a deep breath. Explain the trust to me again. The one Catherine and I set up 10 years ago. Patrick nodded. He shifted into lawyer mode. His voice became precise and clinical. The Catherine Mitchell Revocable Living Trust. It holds the title to the house, the investment accounts, and the personal property, including the piano. You are the primary trustee. You have sole authority to buy, sell, or manage the assets. And Brandon, I asked. Brandon is the successor trustee, Patrick continued. But here is the key. He only assumes power upon your death or your proven incapacitation. Incapacitation, I repeated. That is the word they are hanging their hats on. Exactly. The trust has a very specific clause regarding incapacitation. It requires the written certification of 2 independent physicians stating that you are unable to manage your own affairs. 2 physicians? Yes. And that is why they are bringing in Dr. Evans tomorrow. I nodded slowly. The pieces were fitting together. They have Dr. Evans, I said. He is a crook. He will sign anything for a bottle of scotch. But they need a second one. They will probably try to use the hospital records, Patrick said. Or they might try to bribe another doctor. But here is where they are walking into a trap, Gerald. If Brandon acts as trustee and sells assets like the piano before he has that certification, he is committing fraud. He is selling property he does not legally own. It is a felony. And if he tries to sell the house, I asked, he cannot close the deal without the certification. The title company won't insure it. So he is rushing to get you declared incompetent so he can retroactively justify his actions. I looked at the ducks floating on the pond. They looked so peaceful, unaware of the predators beneath the surface. So if I prove I am competent, I said, then everything he has done is illegal. Patrick nodded. Correct. If you are sane, he is a thief. If you are competent, he is a fraudster. And since we have evidence that he is manufacturing the incompetence that makes it a criminal conspiracy. I smiled. It was the first time I had genuinely smiled in days. So we let him try, I said. We let him think he has won. We let him bring in Dr. Evans. We let him list the house. We let him host the open house. Patrick looked at me with a mixture of concern and admiration. You are playing a dangerous game, Gerald. If Dr. Evans signs that paper and they file it with the court, you legally cease to be a person. You become a ward of the state. We would have to fight for months to reverse it. That is why I need you to be ready, I said. When is the open house? Sunday, Patrick said. I saw the draft listing online. They are moving fast. Sunday, I said. That gives me 3 days. I stood up, gripping my walker. The pain in my hip was screaming, but I ignored it. "On Sunday, I want you to come to the house," I said. "Bring the police. Bring the sheriff. And bring the trust documents." Patrick stood up too. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "I will be there. But Gerald, be careful with Evans. He is not a doctor anymore. He is a drug dealer with a prescription pad. Do not let him inject you with anything." "I won't," I said. I turned to walk back to the house that was legally mine but felt like a prison. "One more thing," Patrick called out. I stopped and turned around. Harrington, the man who bought the piano. I did some digging. And he is hosting a dinner party tonight. He is showing off his new acquisition. I felt a cold rage tighten my chest. He was playing her piano. He was letting strangers spill wine on it. "Get the paperwork ready." "Patrick," I said. "On Sunday we take back the house. On Monday, we take back the piano." I walked back to the house under the gray sky. Brandon was waiting on the porch, checking his watch. "You were gone 20 minutes, he snapped. "I told you not to push it. I needed the fresh air," I said, shuffling past him. "It smells like rot in the basement." He looked at me suspiciously, but he did not say anything. He was too stressed. He was thinking about the appraisal. He was thinking about the debts. He was thinking about Dr. Evans coming tomorrow. He did not know that the man hobbling past him had just authorized his legal execution. I went back down to the basement. I sat on the bed and looked at the calendar on my phone. Tomorrow was Friday, the day of the mental evaluation. Dr. Evans was coming to certify that I was a vegetable. He was coming to ask me questions, to confuse me, to twist my words. I pulled a notebook from under my mattress. For the last 2 nights, I had not just been sleeping. I had been studying. I had been memorizing every cognitive test used in geriatric evaluations, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, the mini mental state exam. I knew them backward and forward, but I was not going to pass the test. No, that would be too easy. If I passed the test, Evans would just lie and say I failed. I was going to do something much more damaging. I was going to use Dr. Evans to destroy Brandon's credibility forever. I lay back and closed my eyes. The alliance was formed. The trap was set. The legal shark was circling in the water. All I had to do now was be the bait. Friday arrived with the weight of a funeral procession. The sky was a slate gray that pressed down against the windows of the living room, matching the mood inside the house. I sat in the armchair, my walker positioned prominently in front of me like a barricade. I was dressed in the same cardigan from the day before, but I had buttoned it unevenly. It was a small detail, but in the world of psychiatric evaluation, small details were the difference between a clean bill of health and a one-way ticket to a secure facility. At 2 p.m, a silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway. I watched through the sheer curtains as Dr. Evans stepped out. He was a man who wore his vanity like a uniform. His suit was too shiny, his tan was too orange, and his teeth were bleached a blinding white that looked predatory. He carried a leather briefcase that I suspected contained more pre-written verdicts than blank notepads. Brandon met him at the door. I saw the handshake. It was not the firm grip of professional acquaintances. It was the sweaty palm-to-palm slide of co-conspirators. I saw Brandon slip an envelope into Evans's jacket pocket. It was subtle, done with the practice of a man used to paying for shortcuts, but I saw it. The bribe had been delivered. Now the performance had to begin. Stephanie led them into the living room. She was wearing her best concerned daughter-in-law face, her eyebrows drawn together in a mask of worry. "He is right here, doctor," she said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "He has been talking to the walls all morning." Dr. Evans approached me. He smelled of stale tobacco and expensive cologne, a combination that made my stomach turn. He pulled up a chair and sat directly in front of me, invading my personal space. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a gold pen. "Good afternoon, Gerald," he said, his voice loud and slow, as if he were speaking to a toddler or a foreign tourist. "Do you know who I am?" I looked at him. I looked at the envelope bulge in his pocket. "You are the man here to fix the leak," I said, keeping my eyes unfocused. "The water is getting in. It is rotting the beams." Evans smiled a tight, satisfied smirk. He made a tick mark on his paper. "I am a Dr. Gerald." "Dr. Evans. Brandon asked me to come chat with you. He is worried about your memory." "My memory is fine," I muttered. "It is the structural integrity I am worried about. The load-bearing walls are compromised." Evans looked at Brandon and Stephanie. They nodded, encouraging him. "Tell me, Gerald, what year is it?" Evans asked. I paused. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I calculated the date. It was Friday, October 14th. But I was not going to give him that. "It is the year of the collapse," I said. "The year the rats ate the piano." Evans wrote furiously, disoriented to time, delusional metaphors. I watched his pen move. He was writing exactly what I wanted him to write. If I had answered correctly, he would have found a way to twist it. If I had said it is 2024, he would have said I sounded rehearsed. But by speaking in riddles that were actually truths, I was giving him enough rope to hang himself. Because when a real judge looked at the transcripts later, they would see that the rats were real and the piano was indeed gone. "Let us try some math," Gerald Evans said. "Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" It was a standard test for concentration and cognitive processing. 93, 86, 79. I could do it in my sleep. I was an engineer. I lived in numbers. I looked at the ceiling. I traced the line of the crown molding. 100, I said slowly. Minus 40,000. That leaves nothing. The equity is gone. The foundation is cracked. You cannot build on sand, Doctor. Evans stopped writing. He leaned in closer. "Who is stealing the equity, Gerald? Are there people stealing from you?" "Yes," I whispered, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "The people in the house. They changed the locks. They took the keys. They are selling the music." "Who are they?" Evans pressed, his eyes gleaming. "Are they in the room with us right now?" I looked directly at Brandon. He flinched. I looked at Stephanie. She stared back defiantly. "They are wearing masks," I said, "but I can see under them. I have eyes in the walls, Doctor. I have eyes that never blink." Evans sat back, looking triumphant. He turned to Stephanie. "This is classic paranoid schizophrenia with onset dementia," he announced as if I were a piece of furniture. "He believes he is being persecuted. He believes there are devices in the walls watching him. He is dissociating from reality to cope with his physical decline." But I do have eyes in the walls, I thought. 4 of them. Recording every word of this farce in high-definition audio. "Is he dangerous?" Stephanie asked, clutching her pearls. Evans looked at me. I decided to give them the finale they were paying for. I stood up. I let my walker clatter to the floor. I took a step toward Evans, my hands shaking. "You cannot sign the papers!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "The blueprint is wrong. If you sign the papers, the whole house comes down. I have to stop the demolition." I reached for his clipboard. It was a weak, feeble grasp, but Evans recoiled as if I had pulled a knife. "He is aggressive," Brandon yelled, stepping between us. "Sit down, Dad," Stephanie screamed. I collapsed back into the chair, covering my face with my hands. I let out a sob. "I just want my piano," I cried. "Why is it so quiet?" Evans stood up and smoothed his suit jacket. He looked at Brandon with a professional gravity that was entirely faked. "I have seen enough. The disorientation, the paranoia, the aggression. It is all consistent with severe cognitive decline. He is a danger to himself and others. I am recommending immediate conservatorship." He pulled a document from his briefcase. The document. The certification of incapacity. He placed it on the coffee table. He signed it with a flourish. This gives you full legal authority over his estate, effective immediately, he told Brandon. You can make medical decisions. You can manage his finances. You can sell his assets to pay for his care. Brandon picked up the paper. His hands were shaking not with fear, but with greed. He looked at it as if it were a winning lottery ticket. Thank you, Dr. Brandon said. You have no idea how hard this has been for us. I know, Evans said, patting him on the shoulder. You are doing the right thing. He needs professional help. I will file my copy with the court on Monday morning. Until then, this document is valid for emergency purposes. Monday morning. That gave me the weekend. That gave me the open house. Stephanie walked Evans to the door. I heard them whispering in the foyer. I will transfer the rest of the fee tonight, Stephanie was saying. Just make sure he does not hurt anyone before you get him into a facility, Evans replied. And Stephanie, the house is a beautiful property. Let me know when it hits the market. I have some investors who might be interested in a fixer-upper. The door closed. Brandon and Stephanie came back into the living room. They did not look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with ownership. Well, Dad, Brandon said, holding up the paper. It is done. You are officially retired. From everything. We are listing the house tonight, Stephanie said, pulling out her phone. The open house is Sunday. We will have the movers come Monday to take you to the facility. It is a nice place, Gerald. State-funded but clean. I did not answer. I stared at the floor. They thought I was broken. They thought I was defeated. But inside, my mind was racing. Dr. Evans had just certified that I was paranoid about eyes in the walls and people stealing my money. When I played the tapes in court, when I showed the judge the camera footage and the bank transfers, Dr. Evans's diagnosis would not just be wrong. It would be proof of a conspiracy. He had labeled the truth as insanity because he was paid to do so. He had just destroyed his medical license. He had just invalidated every document he signed. And he had just handed me the weapon to annul the sale of the house. Brandon walked over to the thermostat and turned up the heat. It is chilly in here, he said. I watched him. Enjoy the heat, son, I thought. Because on Sunday it is going to get very cold for you. They left me in the living room while they went to the kitchen to open a bottle of champagne. I heard the cork pop. I heard the clink of glasses. Cheers to the future, Stephanie said. Cheers to us, Brandon replied. I reached down and picked up my walker. I pulled myself up. I walked to the window and looked out at the gray afternoon. The rain was starting again. It was washing away the dust. I looked at the reflection of the room in the glass. The empty space where the piano stood was a gaping wound. I promise you, Catherine, I whispered to the glass. I promise you they will pay for every note they stole. I turned and walked back to the basement. I had work to do. I had to prepare the final stage of the trap. The open house was not going to be a sale. It was going to be a show. And I was the director. I sat down at my computer in the basement. I pulled up the smart home interface. I looked at the schedule for Sunday. Open house 1:00 p.m. to 4:00 p.m. I cracked my knuckles. I opened the code for the lighting system. I opened the code for the sound system. I opened the code for the automated blinds. If they wanted a haunted house, I would give them a haunted house. But the ghosts wouldn't be dead people. The ghosts would be their own lies coming back to haunt them. I typed a command into the system. Execute protocol judgment day. Timer set. Sunday 1:30 p.m. I sat back and watched the cursor blink. It was the heartbeat of my revenge. Slow, steady, unstoppable. Sunday morning arrived wrapped in a shroud of fog. But inside my house, everything was bright and fake. Stephanie had been up since 5 in the morning staging the property. She had moved furniture, rented expensive art to cover the cracks in the plaster, and filled the house with the scent of vanilla and lavender to mask the smell of old secrets. From my command post in the basement, I watched her on the monitor. She was like a general preparing for battle, armed with air freshener and a smile that could cut glass. Brandon came downstairs at noon. He was wearing a navy blue blazer and khakis, trying to look like the son of a wealthy dynastic family rather than a man who had gambled away his inheritance on digital coins. He unlocked the basement door, but he did not come in. He stood on the threshold, keeping his distance. "Dad," he said, his voice tight. "The open house starts in an hour. We are going to lock this door from the outside. Do not make a sound. Do not turn on the TV. If anyone asks where you are, we are telling them you are visiting your sister in Chicago." I sat on the edge of my twin bed, my hands folded in my lap. I looked the picture of defeat. "I understand, son," I said softly. "I will be quiet as a mouse." "Good," Brandon said. He looked at me for a second, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before he suppressed it. "It is for the best, Dad. Once the house is sold, we can get you into that facility. You will be safer there." He closed the door. I heard the heavy click of the deadbolt. Then I heard the second click of the electronic keypad lock they had installed just for today. They wanted to be absolutely sure I could not wander out and scare the buyers. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade. Then I turned to my laptop. The screen was glowing with the interface of the smart home system. I had written the code myself late last night. It was a masterpiece of automation, a symphony of chaos scheduled to begin at exactly 1:30. At 1 o'clock, the first cars began to arrive. I watched the external cameras. Luxury sedans and SUVs pulled into the driveway. Stephanie greeted them at the door, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was charming, effervescent, and completely fraudulent. "Welcome," she chirped. "Please come in. This is a historic property, lovingly maintained by the original owner for 40 years, I scoffed. Lovingly maintained. She had spent the last 3 years complaining that the house was a dusty relic. By 1:15, the living room was full. There were young couples looking for a starter home and serious investors looking for a flip. And there, in the corner, talking to Brandon, was Dr. Evans. He had brought 2 men in dark suits. I recognized them. They were hard money lenders, the kind of men who bought distressed properties for pennies on the dollar. Evans was not just a corrupt doctor. He was trying to facilitate a fire sale to his cronies. I checked the time. 1:25. I put on my noise-canceling headphones. I did not want to hear the screaming. I wanted to watch it. On the screen, I saw Stephanie guiding a wealthy-looking couple toward the kitchen. She was pointing at the smart thermostat on the wall. "Everything has been upgraded," she was saying. "The entire house is integrated. Smart lighting, climate control, security. It is state-of-the-art." The husband reached out to touch the thermostat. 1:30. I pressed the enter key on my laptop. The show began. First, the automated blinds on every window in the house simultaneously slammed shut. It happened with a loud mechanical whack that made half the guests jump. The house was plunged into sudden darkness. "Oh dear." Stephanie's voice came through the audio feed. "Just a glitch. I must have hit the wrong button on the remote." "Brandon, get the lights." Brandon fumbled for the wall switch. He flicked it up and down. Nothing happened. I had locked out the manual controls. Then the lights came back on. But they were not the warm, inviting, soft white bulbs Stephanie had installed. I had hacked the color-changing LEDs in the smart fixtures. The entire house was bathed in a deep, ominous crimson red. It looked like the inside of a submarine on alert, or a slaughterhouse. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. Then the sound system kicked in. I had bypassed the volume limiters. The speakers recessed in the ceiling crackled to life, But I did not play death metal or sirens. That would have been too crude. I played the truth. The audio file I had edited together began to play at maximum volume. It echoed off the hardwood floors, shaking the very foundation of the house. "This house is a money pit," it was Stephanie's voice. Crystal clear. Recorded from the kitchen conversation 2 days ago. "The wiring is shot, the plumbing is ancient, and the old man is a burden. We just need to paint over the mold and sell it to some idiot before the roof caves in." The guests froze. The wealthy couple in the kitchen dropped their hands from the counter as if it were red hot. Stephanie stood in the center of the room, her face draining of color under the red lights. "What is that?" someone shouted. "It is a mistake," Brandon yelled, waving his arms. "It is a prank. Someone hacked the system." The recording continued. It cut to Brandon's voice. "We will declare him incompetent. Dr. Evans will sign the paper. We take the power of attorney, sell the house, and dump him in the state nursing home. He won't even know what happened." I saw Dr. Evans in the corner. He looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. The 2 investors next to him stepped away, looking at him with disgust. Stephanie ran to the wall panel, frantically tapping the screen, trying to shut it off. But the screen was locked. It simply displayed a countdown timer. "Get out!" Stephanie screamed at the walls. "Stop it!" But I was just getting started. I activated the HVAC system. I reversed the flow on the furnace and cranked the fans to high. Dust, soot, and the accumulated grime of 30 years was blasted out of the vents. A cloud of gray particulate matter filled the room, choking the guests. People began to cough. The panic set in. "Let us get out of here," the wealthy husband shouted, grabbing his wife's arm. They rushed for the front door. Brandon ran to intercept them. "Please wait," he begged. "It is a malfunction. We can explain." But when they reached the front door, it would not open. I had engaged the deadlock. "We are trapped," a woman screamed. The crowd turned into a mob. They pushed and shoved, trying the back door, the patio door, the side entrance. All locked, all controlled by me. I watched them on the monitor. They looked like ants in a jar that someone had just shaken. Stephanie was sobbing in the middle of the living room, her mascara running down her face. Brandon was pounding on the front door, trying to force it open, but the reinforced steel bolt held firm. I let them simmer for exactly 60 seconds. Enough time for the terror to take root. Enough time for them to realize that the house was not a sanctuary, but a cage. Then I played the final card. I triggered the emergency alert system. "Warning. Carbon monoxide detected. Evacuate immediately." "Warning. Gas leak detected." The robotic voice boomed through the red haze. Panic turned to hysteria. People were screaming, clawing at the windows. One of the investors picked up a heavy chair and smashed it through the bay window, sending glass shattering onto the porch. I typed one final command. "Unlock all." The doors clicked open. The guests spilled out of the house like water from a broken dam. They ran. They did not walk to their cars, they sprinted. They left their purses, their coats, their dignity. They just wanted to get away from the house, from hell. Dr. Evans was one of the first out, pushing past a pregnant woman to get to his Mercedes. The investors followed him, jumping into their SUV and peeling out of the driveway without even looking back. In 3 minutes, the house was empty, except for Brandon and Stephanie. They stood in the wreckage of their open house. The red lights were still pulsing. The air was thick with dust. The front door stood wide open, letting in the cold, gray afternoon light. I took off my headphones. I closed the laptop. I picked up my walker. I went to the basement door. I did not need a key. I used the bypass code on the keypad. Beep, 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 click. The door swung open. I ascended the stairs slowly. The pain in my hip was there, but I stood tall. I walked into the living room. Brandon was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. Stephanie was leaning against the wall, staring blankly at the shattered window. They looked up when I entered. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and hatred that was pure and unfiltered. "You," Stephanie whispered. "You did this." I stopped in the center of the room. I looked at the overturned chairs. I looked at the muddy footprints on the carpet. I looked at the red lights that I finally deactivated, returning the room to a dull gray. "I told you," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I told you the foundation was cracked. I told you the house would not hold." "You are crazy," Brandon shouted, scrambling to his feet. "You are insane. You just cost us everything. Do you know who those people were? That was our only chance to sell." I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had stolen my pills, who had tried to erase my existence. "I know exactly who they were," I said. "And I know exactly who you are." I pulled the burner phone from my pocket. "And so does everyone else," I added. "What do you mean?" Stephanie snapped, wiping her eyes. I tapped the screen of the phone. "I live streamed it," I said, "to the neighborhood watch group, to your real estate brokerage's Facebook page, and to the police department's tip line." Stephanie's knees gave out. She slid down the wall until she hit the floor. "You didn't," she gasped. I walked to the window, the one the investor had smashed. I looked out at the empty driveway. "The show is over," I said without looking back at them. "Now get out of my house," "But we live here," Brandon yelled. "You cannot kick us out. We have rights." I turned around. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Low at first, then getting louder. "I think that is for you," I said. Brandon ran to the window. 2 police cruisers were turning onto the street, their lights flashing. Behind them was a black sedan. I recognized it. It was Patrick O'Malley's car. "You called the cops?" Brandon asked, his face turning white. "On your own son, I did not call them on my son," I said. "I called them on the man who stole my medication. I called them on the woman who sold stolen property. And I called them on the trespassers who are currently occupying my home." I sat down on the lime green sofa, the one they had bought to replace Catherine's piano. It was uncomfortable, but right now it felt like a throne. The sirens stopped in front of the house. Car doors slammed. I looked at Brandon and Stephanie. They were paralyzed. They were watching their future dissolve in real time. "You should have just left the piano alone," I said softly. The front door opened. Sheriff Miller stepped in, his hand resting on his belt. Patrick O'Malley walked in behind him, holding a thick stack of files. "Brandon Mitchell, Stefani." "Mitchell," the sheriff said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "I have a warrant for your arrest." I closed my eyes and listened. The click of handcuffs was the sweetest music I had heard in years. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was final. It was a mechanical sound, cold and precise, that cut through the humidity of the living room. Brandon stood there with his hands behind his back, his face pressed against the wall where he had once hung his college diploma. Stephanie was next to him, her wrists bound in silver, her designer dress ruined by dust and sweat. I sat on the lime green sofa and watched. I did not feel joy. Joy is a warm emotion. What I felt was the icy satisfaction of a structural engineer watching a controlled demolition go exactly according to plan. The building had been condemned, the charges had been set, and gravity was doing the rest. Sheriff Miller stepped back and adjusted his belt. He was a big man with a face carved from granite. He had known me for 20 years. He had seen me build this house, and now he was seeing me take it back. "You have the right to remain silent." Sheriff Miller said, his voice flat and professional. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Brandon spun around, trying to face me despite the officer holding his arm. His eyes were wide and wet with panic. "Dad, tell them. Tell them this is a mistake. We were just trying to help you. We were protecting you. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who 2 days ago had stood in my bedroom in the dark and stolen my pain medication to frame me. You were protecting your investment, I said quietly. Not me. Patrick O'Malley stepped forward. He opened the thick file folder he was holding. He did not look at Brandon or Stephanie. He looked at the paperwork as if he were reading a grocery list. Mr. Brandon Mitchell and Mrs. Stephanie Mitchell. You are being charged under Washington state law with multiple felony counts. First count: grand larceny. Specifically, the theft and unauthorized sale of a Steinway Model M piano valued at $40,000. Stephanie let out a shrill cry. It was mine, she screamed. It was in the house. Everything in the house is ours. Patrick turned a page. Correction, Mrs. Mitchell. The house and all its contents are property of the Catherine Mitchell Revocable Living Trust. Gerald Mitchell is the sole trustee. Unless he is declared incompetent, you have no legal claim to so much as a teaspoon in this kitchen. But Dr. Evans signed the paper, Brandon shouted. He signed it yesterday. Dad is incompetent. He is crazy. He hacked the house. Patrick smiled. It was a shark's smile. Dr. Evans is currently in custody, Brandon. He was pulled over 3 blocks from here. It seems he was very eager to cut a deal when he found out about the video evidence. He has already admitted to accepting a bribe to falsify a medical diagnosis. That makes you accessories to medical fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The color drained from Brandon's face. He looked like a ghost. The foundation of his defense, the medical certificate, had just crumbled. Elder abuse, Patrick continued reading from the file. 3rd degree. Define as the intentional infliction of physical pain or mental anguish, confining a mobility-impaired senior to a basement without proper access to sanitation or communication. We have the video of you locking the door. We have the audio of you laughing about it. I stood up. I walked over to them. I leaned on my walker not because I needed it, but because I wanted to look them in the eye from a position of strength. I gave you everything I said. I paid for your college, Brandon. I paid for your wedding. I let you live here rent-free when your first startup failed. And this is how you repay me. By selling my wife's piano. By treating me like a dog in the cellar. It was just business, Stephanie spat out. She was still fighting, still vicious, even in handcuffs. We needed the money. You are old, Gerald. You do not need $1 million house. You are selfish. Sheriff Miller stepped in. That is enough. Get them to the car. Wait, Patrick said, raising a hand. There is one more thing. He pulled a document from the back of the folder. It had a red stamp on it. This is an emergency restraining order granted by Judge Henderson an hour ago. It prohibits both of you from coming within 500 feet of Gerald Mitchell or this property. Brandon blinked. What does that mean? It means you are evicted, Patrick said. Effective immediately. But our stuff, Brandon stammered. Our clothes. My computer. Sheriff Miller looked at his watch. You have 15 minutes. One officer will escort you upstairs to pack a bag. Essentials only. Clothing and toiletries. No electronics. No valuables. Anything you bought with Gerald's money stays here until the forensic audit is complete. 15 minutes, Stephanie screamed. We have lived here for 3 years. We cannot pack in 15 minutes. Then you should have spent less time plotting and more time packing, I said. The officer grabbed Stephanie's arm and marched her toward the stairs. She was wailing now, a high-pitched sound of pure entitlement being shattered. Brandon followed, his head hung low. I sat back down and listened to the sounds from upstairs. I heard drawers being ripped open. I heard Stephanie cursing. I heard the heavy thud of suitcases being dragged across the floor. It was the sound of a virus being purged from the system. Patrick sat down next to me on the sofa. He closed the file. "You okay, Gerald?" he asked. I looked at my hands. They were steady. "I will be," I said, "once they are gone." 10 minutes later, they came back down. They were struggling with hastily packed suitcases. Stephanie's mascara was smeared across her cheeks. Brandon looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. Sheriff Miller pointed to the door. "Let us go." They walked out into the gray afternoon. I followed them to the porch. I wanted to see this. I needed to see this. The street was lined with neighbors. Mrs. Higgins from next door was standing by her hedge holding her cat. The young couple from across the street was watching from their balcony. They had all seen the live stream. They all knew. Brandon stopped at the police cruiser. He turned to look at me one last time. His eyes were red. "Dad, please. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. You froze the accounts." I looked at him. I remembered the boy he used to be, the boy who cried when his goldfish died. Somewhere along the way, that boy had died and this stranger had taken his place. "You are young," I said. "You have your health. You have your freedom once you make bail. I suggest you get a job, Brandon. A real one." "But Dad," he pleaded. "Don't call me that," I said, my voice hard as steel. "You lost the right to call me that when you locked me in the basement." "Officer, take him away." The officer pushed Brandon's head down and guided him into the back seat. Stephanie was already in the other car, screaming at the window. The doors slammed shut. The engines roared to life. I watched as the two police cruisers drove down the street. I watched until their taillights disappeared around the corner. Silence descended on the neighborhood, the kind of silence that comes after a storm. Mrs. Higgins waved at me from her yard, a small, tentative wave. I nodded back. I turned to Patrick and Sheriff Miller. "Thank you," I said. "Just doing the job," Gerald the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "We will need you down at the station on Tuesday to give a formal statement, but for now, get some rest." "I will," I said. They walked to their cars and drove away, leaving me alone on the porch. I turned and looked at my house. The front door was open. The red lights were off. The dust was settling. It was empty. For the first time in 3 years, it was truly empty. No Stephanie complaining about the decor. No Brandon asking for money. No tension. No lies. I walked inside and closed the door. I locked it. Not with the smart lock, but with the manual deadbolt I had reinstalled myself last night while they were sleeping. The solid brass click was the most beautiful sound in the world. I walked into the living room. I looked at the lime green sofa. "I hate that thing," I said aloud. I went to the basement door. I opened it. I looked down into the darkness where I had spent the last 3 days. "I am never going down there again," I whispered. I walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge. It was full of their food. Kale smoothies, organic tofu, expensive wines. I took a garbage bag from under the sink. I started sweeping everything into it. The wine, the tofu, the smoothies. I cleared the shelves until the fridge was bare. Then I went to the freezer. Way in the back, hidden behind a bag of frozen peas, was a tub of butter pecan ice cream, Catherine's favorite, and mine. I took it out. I found a spoon. I walked back to the living room and sat in my armchair. The house was quiet, but it was not a lonely quiet. It was a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a building that had withstood an earthquake and was still standing. I took a bite of ice cream. It was cold and sweet. I pulled out my burner phone. I had one more message to send. "Leonard, Operation Clean Sweep is complete. Bring the truck tomorrow." I looked at the empty space where the piano used to be. "I am coming for you, Catherine," I said to the empty room. The house was mine again. My life was mine again. and tomorrow I was going to complete the restoration. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I fell asleep without fear. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds over Seattle. It was a crisp, clear light that made everything look sharp and defined. I sat in the passenger seat of Leonard's moving truck. My hip was stiff from the excitement of the previous day, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind us, Patrick O'Malley followed in his sedan, accompanied by a deputy sheriff, just in case things got ugly. We were heading up the hill to the gated community where Richard Harrington lived. This was the man who had tried to buy my land for pennies. The man who treated the neighborhood like his personal monopoly board. And the man who currently had my wife's soul sitting in his living room. Leonard shifted gears as the truck groaned up the steep incline. "You ready for this, Gerald?" he asked, his eyes on the road. "Harrington is a bully. He is not going to hand it over just because you ask nicely." "I am not asking nicely, Leonard," I said, staring at the passing mansions. "I am done asking. Today I am taking." We pulled up to the security gate. The guard stepped out, looking at the beat-up moving truck with disdain. He started to wave us away, but Patrick pulled up alongside us and flashed a court order through his window. The gate opened slowly. Even the guards knew better than to argue with a writ of replevin signed by a judge. Harrington's house was exactly as I expected. It was a sprawling monstrosity of glass and steel devoid of warmth or character. It looked like an office building that had gotten lost in the suburbs. There were several luxury cars in the driveway. It seemed the dinner party from last night had turned into a weekend brunch. Perfect, I thought. An audience. Leonard parked the truck right in front of the main entrance, blocking the view of the fountain. We climbed out. Patrick joined us, smoothing his suit jacket. The deputy stood back, his hand resting on his belt, a silent reminder of the law. I rang the doorbell. It played a ridiculous electronic chime. A moment later, the door swung open. Richard Harrington stood there wearing a silk robe and holding a mimosa. He looked at me, then at the truck, then at Patrick. His lip curled in a sneer. "Mitchell," he said, "I heard you had some drama at your place yesterday. What do you want?" "You are blocking my driveway." "I want my piano, Richard," I said, stepping forward. My walker clacked loudly on his marble porch. Harrington laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "I bought that piano fair and square, old man. I have a bill of sale signed by your son. If you have a problem with it, take it up with him. Now get off my property before I call security." He started to close the door, but I jammed the rubber foot of my walker into the gap. Patrick stepped forward. He held up a document. "Mr. Harrington, my name is Patrick O'Malley. I represent the Catherine Mitchell Revocable Living Trust. The piano you purchased is the property of that trust. Brandon Mitchell had no legal authority to sell it. Therefore, the transaction is void ab initio." Harrington rolled his eyes. "Void ab what?" "Speak English." "It means void from the start," Patrick said, his voice sharpening. "It means you purchased stolen property. Under state law, that makes you a receiver of stolen goods. We are here to recover the asset. You can step aside and let us take it, or the deputy here can arrest you for felony possession of stolen property." Harrington's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his silk robe. He looked at the deputy, who nodded grimly. "This is ridiculous," Harrington sputtered. "I paid $40,000 cash for that thing. Who is going to reimburse me?" "That is between you and Brandon," Patrick said calmly. "Although I suspect Brandon will have a hard time paying you back from a prison cell. Now, are you going to let us in, or do I need to call the news crews? I am sure they would love a story about a prominent developer hoarding stolen heirlooms from a disabled widower." Harrington looked at the driveway. He saw the neighbors slowing down to watch. He saw the determination in my eyes. He realized that his money had no power here. "Fine," he spat, backing away. "Take the damn thing." It was out of tune anyway. We walked into the house. The interior was cold and sterile. White walls, white furniture, abstract art that looked like spilled paint. And there, in the center of the sunken living room, was the Steinway. My heart stopped. It looked small in this cavernous room. It looked lonely. I walked toward it. My pace quickened, ignoring the pain in my leg. There were 3 people sitting on the sofas nearby holding drinks. They stopped talking and stared at us. I reached the piano. I ran my hand along the black lacquer finish. It was still cold from the air conditioning. Then I saw it. On the lid of the piano right in the center was a white ring, a water stain. Someone had set a cold drink directly on the wood without a coaster. I felt a surge of rage so pure it made my vision blur. This was not just a piece of furniture. This was where Catherine had played Chopin on rainy Sundays. This was where she had taught Brandon to play scales before he lost his way. I turned to Harrington. "Who put a drink on this piano?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Harrington shrugged. "Who cares? It is just wood." I walked up to him. I was 3 inches shorter than him and relied on a walker, but in that moment I felt 10 feet tall. "It is not just wood, you ignorant barbarian," I hissed. "It is 100-year-old Honduran mahogany. It is a masterpiece of engineering. And you treated it like a cheap coffee table." I turned to Leonard. "Get it out of here. Now, before this place corrupts it any further." Leonard and his assistant brought in the heavy moving blankets and the dolly. They worked with the reverence of monks handling a holy relic. They wrapped the legs. They secured the lid. They lifted it gently. Harrington watched his arms crossed, his face sulking. "You know I was doing you a favor," he muttered. "Your son said you were broke. He said you needed the money for surgery." I stopped. I looked at him. "My son is a liar, Richard. And you are a vulture. You knew that price was too low. You knew he was desperate. You saw an opportunity to exploit a weakness and you took it. That is how you do business. That is how you built this house. By eating the weak." I pointed at the piano as it was wheeled out the door. "But you forgot one thing. Some things are not for sale, and some people do not break." I walked out of his house. I did not look back. I heard Harrington slamming the door behind us, a final impotent tantrum. We loaded the piano onto the truck. Leonard secured it with straps. I climbed back into the passenger seat. "Where to, Gerald?" Leonard asked. "Home," I said. "Take us home." The drive back was silent, but it was a comfortable silence. I watched the city pass by. I thought about the last 3 days. I had been betrayed. I had been imprisoned. I had been humiliated. But I had fought back. I had used the very tools they mocked to dismantle their lies. I had used engineering to expose the cracks in the foundation. I had used the law to reinforce the structure. And now I was bringing the heart of the house back. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked different. The for sale sign that Stephanie had planted in the yard was gone. Patrick had pulled it up and thrown it in the trash on his way out yesterday. The house looked tired, but it looked proud. It was standing tall. Leonard and his assistant unloaded the piano. They wheeled it up the ramp. They brought it into the living room. The space where the lime green sofa had been was now empty. I had dragged that monstrosity out to the curb this morning for the garbage collectors. "Set it right there," I said, pointing to the bay window. "Exactly where the light hits." They lowered the piano. They reattached the legs. They polished the finish, wiping away the fingerprints of the strangers who had touched it. When they were done, Leonard patted me on the shoulder. "It is good to have her back, Gerald." "Yes, it is," I whispered. They left. Patrick shook my hand and drove away. I was alone. I locked the front door. I walked over to the piano. I sat down on the bench. It groaned slightly, a familiar sound that brought tears to my eyes. I opened the lid. The keys were white and waiting. I looked at the water stain on the top. It was a scar. A reminder of the time the music was held hostage. But scars are just proof of survival. I placed my hands on the keys. My fingers were stiff. My knuckles were swollen. But they remembered. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I did not play a song of victory. I did not play a song of anger. I played Catherine's favorite nocturne. The notes floated into the air, filling the empty house, pushing away the shadows of the last few days. The house seemed to sigh in relief. The acoustics were perfect. I was home. The piano was home. But there was one final piece of business to attend to. The cleanup was not just about furniture. It was about consequences. Tomorrow was the court hearing, the arraignment. Brandon and Stephanie would be standing before a judge expecting mercy, expecting that I would not show up. They were wrong. I stopped playing. The last note hung in the air, vibrating with resolve. I pulled out my phone. I dialed the number for the finest piano restorer in the city. "Hello," I said. "I have a Steinway that needs some urgent care. And while you are at it, do you know anyone who removes red wine stains from hardwood floors? I have a lot of work to do." I hung up. I looked at the empty living room. It was time to rebuild. And this time I was going to build it so strong that nothing could ever tear it down again. The hallway of the King County Superior Court was long and lined with marble that was the color of old bone. It was a place designed to make you feel small. It echoed with the footsteps of lawyers in expensive shoes and the hushed prayers of defendants waiting for their lives to be weighed on a scale. I sat on a wooden bench near the elevators. My hands rested on the handle of my cane. I did not use the walker anymore. My hip had healed, and so had my spirit. Patrick O'Malley stood next to me, checking his watch. He looked like a general who had just won a war without firing a single shot. "They took the plea deal," Patrick said quietly. "They had no choice. The evidence was overwhelming. 5 years probation, 2,000 hours of community service, restitution for the legal fees, and the cost of the piano restoration. And Stephanie has surrendered her real estate license permanently. She will never sell another house in this state again." I nodded. It was a fair sentence. It was justice. But I was not here for the legal verdict. I was here for the personal one. The double doors at the end of the hall swung open. Brandon and Stephanie walked out. They looked like ghosts of the people they used to be. Stephanie was wearing a plain gray suit that was ill-fitting. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a messy bun. She did not look at me. She walked straight to the elevators, her eyes fixed on the floor, her face a mask of bitter defeat. She pressed the button repeatedly, as if she could speed up her escape from the reality she had created. But Brandon stopped. He looked at Stephanie's back, then he looked at me. He hesitated. He looked like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to jump or step back. Then he walked toward me. He looked older. The arrogance that had defined him for the last 3 years was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. His shirt was wrinkled. He had lost weight. Patrick stepped forward, instinctively moving to block him, but I raised my hand. "It is okay, Patrick," I said. "Let him speak." Brandon stopped 5 feet away. He did not come closer. He knew the boundary. The restraining order was just a piece of paper, but the wall between us was made of something much harder. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was cracked and dry. I looked at him. I did not see the man who had locked me in a basement. I saw the toddler who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. I saw the teenager I taught to drive. And the pain of that memory was sharper than any surgeon's knife. "Hello, Brandon," I said. "I am sorry," he said. The words rushed out of him like water from a broken dam. "I am so sorry. I know that does not fix anything. I know I messed up. But it was not supposed to go this far. We were drowning, Dad. The debt. The pressure. I just wanted a way out. I listened. I let him speak. I owed him that much. Not as his father, but as a human being witnessing another's suffering. Stephanie said it would be easy. He continued, tears welling in his eyes. She said you would be happier in the facility. She said the house was too much for you. I let her convince me. I am weak, Dad. I know I am weak. But I never wanted to hurt you. I tightened my grip on my cane. You stole my medication, Brandon, I said softly. You tried to gaslight me into thinking I was insane. You sold your mother's piano to a man who treated it like a coaster. That is not weakness, son. That is cruelty. Brandon flinched as if I had struck him. I know, he sobbed. I know. And I have lost everything. Stephanie is leaving me. Did you know that? She blames me for the recording. She says I ruined her life. I have no job. I have no home. I am sleeping on a friend's couch. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I just want to know if someday. Not now. But someday. Can I call you? Can we start over? I will work for it. I will pay you back every cent. I just do not want to lose my father, too. I looked at him and I felt a heavy stone in my chest. It was the weight of a love that had nowhere to go. I loved him. I would always love him. He was my blood. But love is not the same thing as trust. Love is a feeling. Trust is a choice. And he had destroyed that choice. I stood up slowly. I looked him in the eye. Brandon, I said. Do you remember when you were 10 years old and you broke the neighbor's window with a baseball? You came home and hid in the closet because you were afraid I would be angry. He nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. I told you then that accidents happen, I said. I told you that we fix accidents. But this was not an accident, Brandon. You made 1,000 choices. Every day for 3 years you chose money over me. You chose your wife's ambition over my dignity. You chose to lock that door. I took a breath. The air in the hallway felt thin. I forgive you, I said. Brandon's face lit up with a desperate hope. You do, yes, I forgive you. Carrying hate is too heavy for an old man with a bad hip. I do not hate you, Brandon. I pity you. I stepped closer, leaning in so only he could hear. But forgiveness does not mean access. You broke something that cannot be glued back together. You showed me who you really are when you thought I was powerless. I believe you are sorry now because you lost. But if you had won, if Dr. Evans had signed that paper, if the house had sold, would you be sorry then? Or would you be counting the money in Canada while I rotted in a state ward? Brandon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He knew the answer. We both did. I have a new life now, Brandon, I said, stepping back. I have a garden to tend. I have a piano to play. And I have peace. I cannot let you back in because you bring chaos. You bring storms. And I am done with storms. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Stephanie was gone. Go, I said, pointing to the exit. Go and find out who you are when you are not trying to steal someone else's life. Grow up, Brandon. That is the only way you will ever find peace. Dad, wait, he cried, reaching out a hand. Goodbye, son, I said. I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every instinct in my body screamed to turn around to hug him, to tell him I would fix it. That is what fathers do. They fix things. But I was an engineer, and I knew that some structures are too damaged to be repaired. Sometimes you have to condemn the building to save the land. I walked toward the exit with Patrick. I heard Brandon sobbing behind me. I heard his footsteps echoing on the marble as he walked the other way toward the street, toward a life he would have to build with his own hands for the first time. Patrick opened the heavy courthouse door for me. The sunlight hit my face. "You did the right thing," Gerald Patrick said. "I know," I said. But as we walked down the steps, I did not feel triumphant. I felt a quiet grief. I had won the war, but I had lost the soldier. Yet as I looked at the city skyline, I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. I was free. I was safe. And for the first time in a long time, I belonged only to myself. "Let us go get some coffee, Patrick," I said. "I think I am ready to go home." 3 months have passed since the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded from my street. 3 months since the noise and the chaos and the betrayal were swept out the front door, leaving behind a silence that I have learned to cherish. The house is different now. It is no longer a museum of the past, nor is it a staging ground for a greedy future. It is simply a home. My home. I wake up early these days. My hip still aches when it rains, but I do not mind. It is a reminder that I am still here, still feeling, still standing. The first thing I do is walk to the back door and let Justice out. Justice is my new roommate. He is a 2-year-old Siberian husky, with eyes as blue as glacial ice and a loyalty that cannot be bought or sold. I adopted him from the shelter the week after Brandon was sentenced. The shelter volunteer told me he had been returned twice because he was too protective. I told her that was exactly what I was looking for. Now he patrols the perimeter of the yard, chasing away squirrels and keeping watch over the sanctuary we have built together. I spent the first month doing nothing but cleaning. I scrubbed every inch of the house. I washed the walls where Stephanie had hung her pretentious art. I ripped up the carpets that Brandon had walked on with his muddy shoes. I wanted to exorcise their presence not with sage or rituals, but with soap and water and hard work. I hired a contractor to undo the damage they had done to the basement. We tore out the damp drywall and the cheap twin bed. We installed proper lighting and ventilation. It is no longer a prison cell. I turned it back into my workshop. My drafting table is there again, covered in blueprints and sketches. I am consulting on a pro bono basis for a local community center. They need a structural engineer to ensure their new roof can handle the snow. It feels good to be useful again. It feels good to be respected for my mind, not dismissed for my age. The piano came back from the restorers last week. It took them a month to fix the damage Harrington had caused. They sanded down the water ring on the lid, refinishing the mahogany until it glowed like a deep, dark ruby. They restrung the internal mechanism and replaced the felt hammers. When they wheeled it back into the living room, Justice barked at it, uncertain of the giant beast. But when I sat down and played a simple C major scale, he laid down at my feet and rested his chin on his paws. He knew that this machine was the heart of the house. I play every day now. In the morning, I play Bach to wake up the walls. In the evening, I play Chopin to settle the dust. And sometimes late at night, when the house is very quiet and the memories come flooding back, I play the songs Catherine used to hum while she cooked. I do not cry anymore when I play them. I smile. I realize now that keeping her memory alive does not mean preserving the house in amber. It means living in it. It means filling it with music and life and dignity. My social life has bloomed in unexpected ways. Leonard comes over on Tuesdays. We do not just move chess pieces anymore. We move furniture. We are turning the guest room into a library. Patrick O'Malley stops by on Fridays. He brings a bottle of scotch and we sit on the porch watching the sun go down. He tells me about his cases about other people who are fighting for their dignity. He told me that my case has become something of a legend in the legal community. They call it the Mitchell precedent, a warning to anyone who thinks the elderly are easy targets. As for Brandon and Stephanie, I do not track them. I do not search for their names on the internet. Patrick tells me they are serving their probation and living in a small apartment across the city working minimum wage jobs to pay off their debts. I wish them well in the abstract way you wish well to a stranger you read about in the newspaper. But they are no longer characters in my story. They were a chapter, a dark and painful chapter, but the page has been turned. I have learned that forgiveness is not about letting people back in. It is about letting them go so they no longer occupy space in your head. I had the locks changed one last time. The new system is biometric. It reads my fingerprint. It reads the rhythm of my heart. It only opens for me and the people I choose to trust. There are no spare keys hidden under the mat. There are no back doors. Yesterday, I hosted a dinner party. Not a staging for buyers, but a gathering of friends. Mrs. Higgins from next door brought a casserole. Leonard brought his wife. Patrick brought his grandson, who is studying architecture. We sat around the dining table, the same table where I had spilled the soup to save my life. We laughed. We told stories. The house was warm and full of light, and for the first time in 3 years, I looked around and realized that I was not alone. I had built a new family, a family not defined by DNA, but by shared values, by mutual respect, and by the simple act of showing up for one another. Tonight, the house is quiet again. The sun is setting, casting long golden shadows across the floor. I walk over to the Steinway. The light hits the keys just right, illuminating the ivory. I sit down. My reflection stares back at me from the polished fallboard. I see a man with wrinkles and gray hair, but I do not see a victim. I see a survivor. I see a builder. I place my hands on the keys. I take a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of lemon polish and old wood. I begin to play Rhapsody in Blue. The music starts slow, a low trill that climbs upward, reaching for the sky. It is a song of chaos and beauty, of struggle and triumph. It is the soundtrack of a city, and it is the soundtrack of my life. My fingers move with a strength that surprises me. I am 68 years old. My hip is made of titanium. My heart is scarred. But my soul is brand new. The music swells, filling the room, filling the house, filling the street outside. I play for Catherine. I play for justice sleeping at my feet. But mostly I play for myself. I am Gerald Mitchell. I am still here. And I am just getting started. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not an easy one to tell, but it was a necessary one. I know there are many of you out there who feel invisible, who feel that your age makes you a burden or a target. I want you to look at me and know that you are wrong. You have value. You have power. And you have the right to demand respect. If you have ever had to stand your ground against someone you loved, let me know in the comments below. Tell me your story. Where are you listening from? Are you in Seattle like me, or are you on the other side of the world? I read every comment because your stories give me strength, just as I hope mine gives you strength. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share these truths with more people who need to hear them. There are 2 more stories on the screen right now that I think you will find inspiring. Click on one of them and let us keep the conversation going. Take care of yourselves. Protect your peace. And remember, the locks on your house are for your safety, but the keys to your life belong only to you. Never hand them over to anyone. See you in the next video.